Hello, welcome back to my haunted library. It's Regina. So today I'm back with another chapter review for Robert McKee's story, and this is chapter 17, Character. Developing characters for myself as a writer is one of my favorite things to do, and I think my background in theater and film, and even my early training as an actor when was in college, I took a lot of classes in that, and that got me thinking about character a lot. And I also love to study, I mean, hopefully not in a stalker kind of way, but I love studying people and watching their mannerisms in life, and picking up on little different characterizations. So there are only two chapters after this one, so I am getting to the end of this book, thank goodness. But it only took me 2 years. But let's get right into this chapter. So this is chapter 17, Character. So he's talking about in the Middle Ages, this concept of the mind worm. Suppose a creature had the power to burrow into the brain and come to know an individual completely. Dreams, fears, strengths, weakness. Suppose that this mind worm also had the power to cause events in the world. Then he goes on to state, the writer is a mind worm. We too burrow into a character to discover his aspects, his potential, then create an event geared to his unique nature, the inciting incident. For each protagonist is different. For one perhaps finding a fortune, for another losing a fortune, but we design the event to fit the character. The precise happening needed to send him on a quest that reaches the limits of his being. Characters are not human beings. He puts that in bold type. And I think that is important to remember. I remember being in a writer's workshop once where someone was trying to write characters that people he really knew. And it was really important for him to have these characters resemble real people. But the problem is that a real person doesn't function that well dramatically in a script. That's why there is a character, and it's more about how this character functions in the story. And he gets into how to create a multi-dimensional character, but that doesn't necessarily mean like life. Like, for example, if you said, okay, I'm going to write this scene, and this is something that he was trying to do. I'm going to write this scene that seems really real, like if I were just to, now of course there is reality TV, but that is heavily edited and it's like scripted. The situations are scripted. They're choosing characters. Those people are probably playing a different role than who they really are. I mean, I hope that's not who they really are. And the situation is, created. The conflict is created, like Jersey Shore. We're going to have, Mike hide something, a dead fish in Snooki's lingerie drawer, and then we'll see what happens kind of thing. So like watching a real person do something like drive a car or something would be very boring unless there was something interesting going on, like some kind of scene or some kind of conflict, like during the drive, the tire blows and she's got to pull over and it's a dark street and then a monster shows up or whatever, but just real life is not that interesting. I think that's what he's trying to say here. A character is no more a human being than the Venus de Milo is a real woman. A character is a work of art, a metaphor for human nature. So character design. So think about it as designing your character. Begins with an arrangement of the two primary aspects, characterization and true character. To repeat, characterization is the sum of all the observable qualities, the combination that makes the character unique, the physical appearance, style of speech, gesture, sexuality, age, IQ, occupation, so on and so forth. True character waits behind the mask. I remember when I was in acting school, when I went to college, I was a theater major for my first two years, I think, and then I switched majors. It's a long story, but I did learn a lot from some of those classes. Not all of them, but definitely some of them. So the one thing we were always taught in theater class in acting school was ask yourself, what does your character want? And how does the character go about getting what he or she wants or they want? What are the tactics then you use to get what you want? It was actually a very hard exercise. And you have to think about that too when you're writing your characters in your novel or your short story. What do they want? How do they go about getting it? I highlighted this. Do not reduce characters to case studies. An episode of child abuse is the cliche in vogue at the moment. Well, that was in the 90s. So, in other words, the child abuse is from the past is the motivation for the killer or something. We've seen that before many times. The audience comes to understand your character in a variety of ways. The physical image and setting says a lot, but the audience knows that appearance is not reality. Characterization is not true character. Nonetheless, a character's mask is an important clue to what might be revealed. What other characters say about a character is a hint, and what a character says about himself is a hint. But those are just hints, because we know if the writer's doing his or her job correctly, it's not just the surface that you're going to get from your character. When I was writing Black Magic, my character is considered like a nice guy. You know, he's the nice guy, but he's not a nice guy, and that's revealed as layers are peeled off. I mean, hopefully, like generally, if someone says to me, "Well, you know, I'm the type of person who," and they say something, and I try to catch myself before I ever do that because it seems very phony. It's like if someone says that, I'm kind of like, maybe actually it's the opposite. Like I'm the nicest person in the room is probably the biggest bitch in the world. So just saying that, you know, think about those things. You don't want your character to be exactly how they appear to be. In fact, characters with lucid self-knowledge, those reciting self-explanatory dialogue meant to convince us that they are who they say they are not only boring, but phony. Character dimension. Dimension is the least understood concept in character. When I was an actor, he was an actor too, directors would insist on round, three-dimensional characters, and I was all for that. But when I asked them what exactly is a dimension and how do I create one, let alone three, they'd waffle, mumble something about rehearsal, then stroll away. So it's hard to explain what that is. Decorating a protagonist with quirks does not open his character and draw empathy. So just making someone, you know, zany and quirky, that's not really revealing any dimension in the character. It's like set dressing. And I think we've all seen examples of maybe some unsuccessful actors who seem like that. I can't think of one off the top of my head. Dimension means contradiction. He talks about like the great character of, you know, the main character of the Scotch play, I won't say, by William Shakespeare, I won't say the name, but he is at once ambitious, murderously ambitious, and guilt-ridden about it. So he's conflicted, which gives him dimension, makes him more interesting than just like a one-dimensional character. I think that's what they mean. A one-dimensional character would be like your supervillain. What's motivating that villain is more interesting. The protagonist must be the most dimensional character in the cast to focus empathy on the star role. And then he makes it interesting, a little aside here about Blade Runner, one of my favorite movies. Marketing positioned the audience to empathize with Harrison Ford's Rick Deckard. But once in the theater, filmgoers were drawn to the greater dimensionality of the replicant Roy Batty, Rutger Hauer, one great performance of all time. As the center of good shifted to the antagonist, the audience's emotional confusion diminished its enthusiasm. And what should have been a huge success became a cult film. Now I'm wondering about cult films. Someone had made a comment on my video about Phantom of the Paradise that I guess I had remarked that it wasn't a successful film, and they were saying, well, it is because, you know, we're talking about it. But what I meant was like it wasn't a successful film at the time. It's like, and I think that is kind of what a cult film is in a way. Like Rocky Horror Picture Show was not like a big success when it came out. It probably, like, really nobody saw it, but then it started playing at midnight movies and people came out to and see it in droves, myself included. I was one of those kids back in the day going to see Rocky Horror because you could only go see it at midnight at the TLA Theater in Philly on South Street, and the whole aspect of like getting into a car and with your friends and dressing up and driving down to see Rocky Horror and staying up was, you know, part of my teenage shenanigans. It was a lot of fun. So cast design, and I thought this probably for me was the most useful information in this chapter, is like how to design the other characters. Your protagonist is like your sun and your solar system, and all your other characters are orbiting planets and maybe little satellites, depending on their function. They're all held in orbit by the gravitational pull of the star at the center, each pulling at the tides of the other's natures. Very interesting, nice metaphor here. He breaks it down into a diagram, which I will post if I can here, and do a close-up of that, with the protagonist in the center and the different pressures going in different directions, leading to different characters. He doesn't mention this in this book, but it made me think about like stock characters from the old Commedia dell'arte in Italian theater back in like the Renaissance. Very interesting because those characters you see still played out. It's like in the movie Rear Window with Jimmy Stewart, and Thelma Ritter plays like his wisecracking like nurse who comes in to take care of him, and she's also plays that same character in All About Eve. So you see this kind of character. Now we don't know a lot about her character's life. We don't see what happens to her when she leaves, but we don't need to see that. We see her in interacting with the main character, and we're learning about him through her. So that is her function, but we don't need to go into a deep dive with her. In fact, it would kind of kill the story if we followed her home back to her apartment. I mean, you could do that with an experimental story. I'm not saying that you can't, but in a traditional way, you're not going to see that. It's all about the protagonist, and the other characters revolve around him or her. All right, talks about bit parts. And I love this. He talks about the cliche of the New York taxi cab is a bit part. Now, I'm trying to think of anything off the top of my head, but sometimes you'll be watching a movie and you'll see someone who then later becomes a big movie star, but their first role was playing that wisecracking or whatever, cab driver, or some small role. Like there's a Woody Allen movie where Sylvester Stallone is like a thug who tries to mug him on the subway or something. But you see these different actors in these parts. And the cab driver is one that I've seen many times. And it is cliche to have sort of that quirky cab driver, or like, the New York cab driver. First of all, that they don't exist anymore in New York, I'm pretty sure, with a Manhattan accent. Or you're getting off 22nd Street. But how to make that cab driver, that small cab driver, like an interesting character. In every scene, each character brings out qualities that mark the dimensions of the others, all held in constellation by the weight of the protagonist at the center. 3 tips on writing characters for the screen. So this would be specifically for the screen. I'll just go over it briefly. Leave room for the actor. So you want to be able to give the actor a chance to develop that character within what you've written. Like, you don't have to spell everything out for them. That's their job. And a really good actor will want that. They don't want you to tell them, every little move that you make, every look. The actor, that's his or her job to do that. So McKee writes here, fall in love with your characters, and that extends to your villains. I would say fall in love with especially with your villains. I love writing villain characters. I think it's great, and I think a lot of actors love playing those villain characters because they're more interesting, and you can hide the motivation behind the mask. And I think a really good actor would do that. Like, let's say it's not even in the script about why he's so evil, but like the Joker in Batman with Heath Ledger, he brought so much of an internal strife and whatever was going on, a motivation to that role. That is a sign of a really good actor and a well-developed character. And then, of course, that was, in the movie Joker with Joaquin Phoenix, which I really loved. And, he kind of takes that character. That character is now the protagonist in that story. So we learn more and more about him and his motivations. Okay, a hint about villains. If your character is up to no good and you place yourself within his being, asking, if I were he in this situation, what would I do? You do everything possible to get away with it. Therefore, you would not act like a villain. You would not twist your mustache. Sociopaths are the most charming folks we ever met. Sympathetic listeners who seem so deeply concerned about our problems while they lead us to hell. Well, that's true. I was thinking about a great villain, and it's also a book that I've read, but I prefer the film. It's so good, is The Talented Mr. Ripley. Matt Damon's character, Tom Ripley, is such, and he also is the protagonist. He's such the charming sociopath that you find yourself rooting for him, even though he's doing dastardly things, but you can't look away. I think that movie's really, really brilliant on many, many levels, and it gets into like the shattered shadow self. No one thinks they're bad. I'm sure Tom Ripley, he's not just a sadist. At least the way he's playing it in the movie, he has reasons for doing what he wants to do. He has a desire, and that goes back to, what does he want? Well, he wants to. Well, first of all, he wants to go to bed with what's his name, Dickie, and Dickie Greenfield. And then when he can't do that, he wants to become him. He wants to be this man he is enamored by. And his that scene in the boat, in the rowboat with those two, with Jude Law, oh my God, it's devastatingly amazing. Character is self-knowledge. And he has a line from Anton Chekhov, the great playwright. Everything I learned about human nature, I learned from me. So, the more you develop your own self, the more you learn about who you are, the more you, try out different things, the more rich your characters are going to be. So for all of those mistakes you've ever made, all of that heartache you've ever had, all those failures or whatever, the things that have caused you pain, chalk it up to ways that you can use it in your artwork so it doesn't go to waste. So he says here, observe, observe your own feelings. You may, hopefully you wouldn't act on this motivation, but you may feel murderous rage. It doesn't mean you're going to act on it, but you can feel it, put it into your artwork, write a beautiful scene where the villain is channeling that rage. Don't do it in real life. Borrow bits and pieces of humanity, raw chunks of imagination and observation from wherever they're found. Assemble them into dimensions of contradiction, then round them into the creatures we call characters. Observation is our source of characterization, meaning like the exterior, how they look, what they wear, what they eat, what car they drive. But understanding of deep character is found in another place. The root of all fine character writing is self-knowledge. I believe you should be able to write any character. Like, you don't have to be writing just about your demographic. Now, there's some different opinions about that, and I'm not talking about like taking, pretending to be a different identity or something and trying to market your book that way. And I don't mean that. But, a female writer should be able to write a male protagonist and vice versa. I've read great works of literature by, like, let's say a gay writer who then makes a beautiful, nuanced love scene between a heterosexual couple. It doesn't matter. It's all about your imagination and putting yourself in that place and using your imagination to tap into the truth of that character. And that comes from self-knowledge, using your imagination. And if we really are honest with ourselves, we can go into a lot of different places. Some of them kind of scary if you're writing in horror, but you're not doing it, you're dreaming it up. And what a wonderful thing. You can get all your frustration and rage out on the page. Okay, we all share the same crucial human experiences. So again, when you really get down to it, we're all the same. We all have the same emotions, and that's going to come out. And if it reads true, the characterization is one thing, like the physical appearance or whatever. It really is about what's inside. And when you tap into that and show that to the audience, we'll all get it because we all know what that feels like. So you have to ask yourself this question: if I were this character in these circumstances, what would I do? The honest answer is always correct. You would do the human thing. Therefore, the more you penetrate the mysteries of your own humanity, the more you come to understand yourself and the more you are able to understand others. All right, I'm going to end it there. He just has a few, one more paragraph where he kind of sums it up. But I thought that quote really beautifully illustrates what this journey of creating characters is all about. It's about looking at yourself, knowing yourself more, observing people, but you really have to be honest about the emotions. And I think that's why we read, or that's why we want to see a good movie. We want to know what someone else is thinking about these things. That doesn't always mean it has to be like, something bad, but you understand let's say, in the Scottish play, you understand the king's dilemma. You understand his ambition. We've all have had an ambition, and we may want to get it achieved in ways that are not so good and shameful ways, and then we feel guilty about it. We can all relate to that kind of thing. Or a love story where you would do anything to get your lover back, and including maybe some not so nice things. Or maybe you've used someone to make yourself feel better, to enhance your self-esteem. maybe you feel bad about it. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're like, oh, this feels good. I want to keep doing that. Or whatever it is. Now you're talking about a villain. Whatever your character is, that's what I think is meant by showing the character having dimension and also flaws. Because inside, we know that we have a lot of those. And maybe when we pick up a book or watch a movie or whatever, we're exploring that. We're thinking how, even unconsciously, how is this character dealing with this? How am I dealing with this in my own life? I think that's what draws us to drama on the page or the stage or the screen. Let me know in the comments below some of your thoughts about character, and do you agree with McKee? Do you have any other books that maybe get into this idea a little bit more that you would like to recommend? I would love to hear your thoughts. So that's all I have for today. Thanks for stopping by my haunted library, and I'll see you soon. Bye.